out about chapter 8, I was going to do it again. Chapter 9. What's the name of chapter 9? Basic contract law. You know, they should have named it something different, because basic contract law doesn't even sound exciting. All right? But that's what it is. This is basic contract law. Now, as we enter into this chapter, let me suggest this to you. Everything we talk about in this chapter does not have to do with real estate. I'll try to bring it back to real estate, but this is a generic contract law chapter. Okay? You'll see a couple of things in here and say, well, Chris, I thought you told me something different. Aha, that's because that was a different type of contract. When it's a real estate contract, we have other rules that apply. So basic contract law, if you'd like to know what the definition of a contract is, this is a very workable definition. Normally the words I use are maybe just slightly different, but very, very close. A legally enforceable contract between two or more parties. Does it say something like that up there so far? Legally enforceable contract between two or more competent parties, okay, to either do or abstain from doing something, and it's based on the concept of consideration. I like this definition, and we will break down the words for you as we go. So we will define what we mean by legally competent, that's testable. We will define for you what we mean by consideration, that's testable. But this is your starter definition of a contract. Legally enforceable contract between two or more competent parties to either do or abstain from doing some legal thing based on the concept of consideration. Are you okay with that definition, or do I need to leave it up for just a moment? Okay? As we enter into this, I'm going to skip the first part for just a second because it comes up a little bit later. We're going to talk about essential elements of a contract later, and you'll see that these all come up, okay? So let's jump to this page right here. On this page, we're now doing like we do in a lot of chapters. We're just throwing out vocabulary words. These are just vocabulary words to you. In talking about contracts, contracts can be expressed or contracts can be implied. Contracts can be expressed or implied. Now listen, by this point, do you understand in this class, there's going to be a high emphasis in real estate about there being expressed, literally written contracts, okay? Now, express contracts are not automatically written, though. A contract can be expressed without being written. For a bonus point, what contract have we talked about in this class that is expressed but not written? I love it. I love it. The oral buyer agency agreement. When I entered into oral buyer agency, I had to express the terms. I will work in your best interest. I'll try to get you the best bargaining position. I'll keep your confidential information confidential. I will typically be paid out of the seller's end of the transaction. Those were the terms, okay? And I asked, can I be your agent? And you said, yes. That's an express contract. Is it written? No, but it's expressed. Obviously, high emphasis on express, but even the buyer agency agreement had to be right at some point, didn't it? Okay, so you'll see that theme a lot in this class. Some contracts could be implied, but I'm telling you, please stay away from those in real estate. Stay away from implied contracts in real estate. If you want something to write into your notes, implied contracts are based on the actions of the parties. An implied contract is a contract that is created by the action of the parties. Now, I will give you an example of an implied contract outside of real estate, if you like. Lisa, do you remember our first anniversary? Okay, well, it was 25 years ago, 26 years ago, so that's why she doesn't remember it. But I remember it. I wanted to take her somewhere nice for her anniversary because she deserved it. Oh, no, actually, I wanted a good steak. I wanted a really good steak. So we go to this restaurant, and I've never been to a restaurant before that was like a white tablecloth. I mean, I'm fresh off the farm, so I don't go to white tablecloth restaurants that much. We go to this really nice restaurant called Prime Only. Prime Only. Have you ever been to a Prime Only? They were back in the day. I think they're out of business now. It's not our fault, actually, but
it might be.
So we go in, and they give us a menu, and the menu doesn't have any prices on it. And I'm like, score! I thought I didn't have to pay anything. Turns out that's not what it means at all. We ordered the food. We got a nice steak. We got some glasses of wine. She got me sick. But anyway, So we're sitting there, what was the contract that I entered into them when I ordered the food and ate it? What contract? That I was going to pay. I was going to pay whatever they bought. That was an implied contract. Actually, as it turned out, we sat really close to the door, so we could just take off. But then we were in breach of contract. They never call us. We dressed in like all black and we had little hoodies and stuff on when we left the door. So they're still looking for us today. But that's not true. That's not true. We did pay for it, implied contract. Okay? Don't enter into those in real estate. Things need to be expressed. You need to know what the heck the subject matter of the conversation is. Express versus implied. High importance on express in this class. You okay with that? Bilateral and unilateral. And listen, if you need something to look at other than me, you're welcome to look at these slides. But actually, I think my definitions are probably a little easier to understand than these slides. So you choose how you want to view it. Bilateral versus unilateral. Do you know what bi and uni mean? Okay. Yeah, uni means one, bi means two. So when we talk about a bilateral contract, see if this sounds about right to you. Bilateral contracts are mutually enforceable. They have a mutual exchange of promises. What word do I keep using?
Mutual.
Mutual. Why? Because it's two parties that have obligations and rights under contract. Mutual exchange of promises. Would it surprise you to know that most of the contracts we talk about in this class are going to be bilateral contracts? The offer and purchasing contract between the buyer and the seller, they both have rights and obligations. Agency agreements between the firm and the client, they both have obligations and rights. Okay? Bilateral contracts. So let me give you a short definition of a unilateral contract. I'm going to give you an example outside of real estate, and then I'm going to give you one important one for real estate. Okay? So unilateral contract. Unilateral contracts, one party is bound. One party will be bound to the contract. One party will be bound, but only if the other party performs some specific act. One party will be bound, but only if the other party performs some specific act. Uni, one party will be bound. One party will be bound, but only if the other party performs some specific act.
Well, how is that something?
Because it's only based on the performance of one party. Let me give you an example.
The party that is bound doesn't have to do anything.
That's right. That's right. So watch this. This is your, and you don't need to write this down since this is outside of real estate, but let me give you an example that's very easy to visualize. I am a house painter. You know that I'm a house painter. I'm walking by your house one day and you yell down from your house, Chris, I will pay you $3,000 if you paint my house. Okay? Well, we just entered into a contract. If I paint your house, how much do you owe me? $3,000. If I paint your house and you don't pay me, you are in what? Breach of contract. On the other hand, if I never paint the house, can I be held in breach? No. No. I can't be held in breach. I only get paid if I perform, but I can't be held in breach. Okay? That is a unilateral contract based on the performance of one of the parties. Now, I told you I'd give you a real estate example, and right now I just want you to write the real estate example down. We haven't explained this example to you. It comes up at the end of chapter 10, which means we'll be talking about it on Friday morning. Okay? So here's your real estate example. An option contract, an option to purchase real estate, is a unilateral contract. An option to purchase real estate is a unilateral contract. If you promise you won't take notes on it, I will walk you through it real quickly because it's coming up in chapter 10, and I'll give you time to write it down at that point. In an option contract, what the buyer does is the buyer actually buys time to determine whether they're going to complete a transaction or not. And so basically the buyer gives the seller some money and says, will you leave this offer open for a period of time? Once the buyer enters into the option contract, if the buyer says, I want to buy it at any time within this period, the seller has to sell it to him. But if the seller says, well, buyer, you got to buy, the buyer said, no, I'll think about it. Because the buyer bought time to consider whether he was going to buy it or not. That's an option contract. We will give you more detail at the end of chapter 10 and tell you why that's an important topic for both test and in the field. Okay? You're not going to see that many of them in the field. Bilateral versus unilateral. You feel okay about that? You know, there's a test. There's a test on bilateral contract. What happens if one party walks away? They're in breach. What happens if the other party walks away? They're in breach. Therefore, it's bilateral. Okay? Very simple test. Executed versus executory. That's a fun word to say. Executory. Here's what we mean in this chapter. An executed contract is a contract where the terms have been fulfilled. An executed contract just simply means the terms have been fulfilled. Without a segue, let me go ahead and tell you what executory means. There's nothing wrong with an executory contract. You're just in the process of fulfilling the terms. Executory, you're in the process of fulfilling the terms. Now let's do a little bit of thinking and a little bit of comparing here. Real estate contracts are actually executory until when? Until closing. Until closing. You haven't fulfilled all the terms until closing when the money has been funded for the property, okay? So there's nothing wrong with it. You're just in the process of fulfilling the terms. Once it's closed, now it's an executed contract, okay? You feel all right with that? Nothing wrong with it. And by the way, do you remember in an earlier chapter we used the word executed in regards to deeds? In chapter 4, when we used the word executed, we said it was executed by the grantor. Do you remember what executed meant in regards to deeds? It just simply means signed. Okay? We're using it in a different context here. Executed contracts have been performed. Executed deeds means they've been signed by the grantor. Okay? All right. A little more complicated here, and if you don't mind, because this slide right here has just a bunch of words and it has a bunch of colors, and you guys are squirrels. So if I left that up there, I know that you would be focused on that and you wouldn't listen to what I was saying. I'm actually going to cut this off, okay? I would suggest you just simply keep this as simple as possible. Valid versus voidable versus void. That's what we're getting ready to talk about, okay? When we talk about the word valid, I want you to start with the idea that a valid contract is enforceable. A valid contract is enforceable. If you would like to add a follow-up concept to that, it's enforceable against both parties, right? Bilateral contract is enforceable against both parties. You with me, Sandy? Okay. Actually, I think the Real Estate Commission thinks this is an important reason why you're in this class, is to understand the significance of valid, enforceable contracts. In a little bit, we're going to talk about agents making mistakes in contracts that will allow one party or the other to walk away. If you make a mistake such that it hurts your party, puts them at a competitive disadvantage, I don't know that you have been a diligent agent if you were to allow that to happen, okay? So it's important that you understand valid contracts. Once we go under contract, I expect the other party to perform. I don't want there to be any loopholes, so to speak, that would allow them to freely walk away. If you want to walk away from a contract, there should be penalties, right? Okay, valid, enforceable contract. That's what you guys are seeking. Having said that, let's look at the next word. Voidable. Voidable. To keep it simple, a voidable contract has a mistake such that it allows one party to walk away. A voidable contract has a mistake such that it allows one party to walk away. Let me remind you of a story that I told you in a previous chapter about a misrepresentation, a negligent misrepresentation by a friend of mine. She said a house was 4,300 square feet when it was actually 3,400 square feet. Who made the mistake? She did. Who did she work for? The seller. Okay, who was harmed by this mistake? The buyer. Now, the buyer has had a statement misrepresented to him, okay? So this buyer has an option. One of the options is that that buyer could freely walk away from this contract and get all their money back because this was the seller's mistake. It was a voidable contract. This buyer chose to close, but they didn't have to. The seller, did the seller have an option of walking away? No, they're the ones that made the mistake. So it was voidable. Do you see how the buyer was put in a competitive advantage in that situation? Agent's fault, buyer had a competitive advantage, it was voidable. Okay? Also, when you're talking about contracts, you'll occasionally hear people say this, and I think I've said it in an earlier class. To enter into a valid contract, you have to be 18, sane, and sober. You have to be 18, sane, and sober. Think about that real quickly. 18, you must have reached the age of majority to enter into a valid contract. Now, when you say, okay, I don't understand where you're going with this, Chris. We're talking about voidable contracts, right? Do you know what the penalty is for entering into a contract with someone under the age of 18? You're not violating any law. It's what? It's voidable. The one that's under the age of 18, they can walk away. Can you walk away? No, you're an adult. You should have known what you were doing. But up until the time that they turn 18, they can literally walk away from the contract. And it's not like you broke the law by doing it. It's just that they have a right that you don't have. It's voidable. Okay? Let's talk about sober. If you got into this business to get people so drunk that they would then enter into contracts, you can get out of it now. Because if they entered into a contract while intoxicated, if they could prove that they did not understand the repercussions of their actions, they could later use that as an excuse to get out of the contract. It would be voidable. 18, so make sure that they are in that. If you got into this business to get people drunk, get out now. Now, I was talking about this one day in class, and I didn't realize how often this happens, but apparently this happens more than I think about it, because I had a friend of mine ask me, she said, listen, by the time I got over to the seller's house from and signed this document, they were already into their second six-pack, and they were pretty much in the wind at that point. And she said, do you think it was a binding contract? I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you judge intoxication. And the sellers never had a problem with being under contract, so I suspect it was okay. But it was actually a legitimate question. If someone is so intoxicated, so high on drugs, that they don't know what they're doing, later they can walk away from that contract. Okay. Let's talk about the insanity limit. When you're dealing with someone who is insane, they never had the legal capacity to enter into a contract. Those contracts would not be voidable, they would be void. They're dead on arrival. You cannot enter into a contract with someone who has been adjudicated to be mentally incapacitated. Okay? There are actually cases about this where people would go in with deeds and try to have someone that's been consigned to Dorothy and Dick sign over a deed. It's not going to do you any good. They don't have the legal capacity to enter into a contract. It would literally be a void contract. Okay? Valid, enforceable. Voidable has mistakes such that it allows one party to walk away, and understand how that affects people that have not reached the age of majority, and also people that are intoxicated. And then void, if someone has been adjudicated insane, they cannot handle their own. That's void. Let me talk to you a little more realistically about void. Void contracts come in two flavors. Okay? One I describe as being a legally void contract. And to be quite honest with you, this is probably about the only one that really will resonate with you. Think about a legally void contract as being a contract in violation of the statute of frauds. Write it down for right now. We'll come back and we'll revisit the statute of frauds. A void contract, a legally void contract, would be in violation of the statute of frauds. Say it for me, Ebony. I know this.
Statute of frauds.
I love the way you talk. Statute of frauds. So clipped. Now, let me remind you what the statute of frauds says. Contracts to convey an interest in real property must be in writing to be enforceable. Do y'all remember that? We talked about it for the first time when we were talking about deeds. Contracts to convey an interest in what? Real property must be in writing to be enforceable. That's the key right there. So here's the situation. I'm sitting at a bar one night, and I'm sitting there next to Ebony, okay? We're sitting there and we're talking. I spend a lot of time in bars. You just happen to walk in. Okay, so we get to talking, I have a piece of property on Glenwood Avenue I'd like to sell for $250,000. She said, great, I'll buy it. Sitting next to her is her attorney. Sitting next to me is the Pope. I don't know what the Pope was doing in town, okay, but he was there. He had a bar. Okay, he was blessing my wine, that's all I know. We just agreed. I'm going to sell her my property, she's going to buy it for $250. It was witnessed by the Pope and her attorney. But it's not in what? Is it enforceable? No, it's not enforceable. It's a violation of statute of frauds. Are either of us going to jail for this? No, it's not that type of violation. But here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow she's going to show up with $250,000. If I don't show up with the deed, can she sue me? No. If I show up with the deed, she doesn't show up with $250,000, can I sue her? Because it was never what? Never enforceable. It was never enforceable. It wasn't valid. Okay? Void. Legally void. And then there's another category of void contracts known as automatically void. Let me give you the short version of this. You cannot enter into a valid contract to do an illegal thing. You can't enter into a legal contract to do an illegal thing. I don't know if you remember from the definition of contract that it talked about doing or abstain from doing some legal act. You cannot enter into a legal contract to do an illegal thing. Make sense? Okay. Valid, enforceable. Voidable, one party can walk away. Void, it never had a chance. It never had a chance. Let me ask you this question though. Can you complete a voidable contract? Is it okay for you to consummate a voidable contract? Yeah, I mean, certainly you can do it. That 17-year-old's not going to be 17 forever. Eventually, they're going to turn 18, and it will be said that they have ratified the contract at that point. That's fine. Nothing illegal. A violation of the statute of frauds. What's going to happen if she does show up tomorrow with $250 and I do show up with the deed? Can we consummate that? Absolutely we can. Just because it's void doesn't mean you can't do it. Okay? It's just not enforceable until we have it all in writing. Okay? I can't compel her to do it unless we have it in writing. And then obviously, if it's automatically void, clearly, you can't enforce that. No. Okay? With the what, I'm sorry?
With the Pope.
With the Pope. Yeah, I did make that up. I mean, that didn't actually happen.
I
Okay.
know, but if they signed the agreement, right, and she was drinking, so what happened? So because we were talking about software, right? So in this case, it would be possible or not?
It depends how intoxicated they are. You know, the Pope, I would have to get him to lay hands on her and find out whether she was incapable of making her own decisions. Okay?
No, would that be an instance where when you visit, then that would be a.
When you do what, I'm sorry?
Like, okay, so we're sitting there, we have verbal, we'll go, woo. But then when we come together to actually complete our duties, from our duties, then that would be the point where we either make it a valid contract, or we both decide, or one side or the other says, this is not.
Well, with the intoxication, you made it overly complicated. This was never in writing at the bar, was it?
Oh, right.
Yeah, it was never in writing, so it was never enforceable. Now, when you get together and bring me the cash, and I bring you the deed, now isn't it in writing, because the deed's in writing? Okay, so yeah, at that point, it's done. So a legally void contract, you can, yeah. Yeah, I just couldn't compel it until it was put in writing. Okay? Valid versus voidable versus, I want to tell you this. There's some interesting worded questions in the AMP book about valid, voidable, and void. I wouldn't get too bogged down into those. I think they're a little bit overly sensitive about their use of the word void and unenforceable and things like that. So if they blow your mind a little bit, don't worry about it. The other ones I think are perfectly good, but bring those to me if they bother you. But don't get too bent out of shape on those. I tend to think that it's very straightforward. Now this is very important. This is very important. We're now getting ready to talk about essential elements of a valid contract. Anytime we talk about an essential elements list, I find it to be important. But remember, this test is not essay, so you're never going to have to write down the 4 essential elements. You just need to see them, recognize them, and understand why they exist. What I'm telling you, for a contract to be valid, you must have these essential elements. Are you ready for these? Very important. I would start out with a list, and then I would explain each one separately. The first one I would put on that list is the concept of mutual assent. For a contract to be valid, there must be mutual assent. If you say mutual consent, I can live with that. Sometimes you hear this referred to as a meeting of the minds. The two parties must understand what it is that they have contracted on. You with me so far?
Yeah.
All right? Please write this down. The way you get to a meeting of the minds, the way you get to the meeting of the minds is through the offer and acceptance process. So offers. Your offers should be clearly defined terms. Offers should be clearly defined terms. In other words, not ambiguous. This is why we don't want agents drafting their own contracts, because they're not in the business of writing clear, concise terms. Like attorneys, I mean, this is what attorneys do every day. That's why we want them to write these contracts. You should fill in the blanks of pre-printed forms, and you should resist the temptation to practice your creative writing skills in a contract. This is the wrong place to practice your creative writing skills, okay? Things need to be concise, they need to be spelled out, they need to be specific, unambiguous. For example, I know you would not do this. I know you wouldn't do this. But having said that, if you said this, the legal description of a property is Chris's house in Holly Glen subdivision. Could that be a valid legal description? It actually could, if it narrows it down to one property in Holly Glen subdivision. But what if I own 3 houses in Holly Glen subdivision? What's wrong with that legal description? It is completely vague. It is completely ambiguous. Offers should be clearly defined terms. Unambiguous. Will you add one more word to me here? Sometimes, for test purposes, you hear it referred to as the offer should be not illusory. That derived from the word illusion. Your offer should not be illusory. Your offer should not be an illusion. Make sense? Okay. Now, let's talk about acceptance. Acceptance should be unconditional acceptance. In other words, the offer was clearly defined, the acceptance was unconditional. Acceptance should be unconditional. I made an offer, you unconditionally accepted it. What do we call this? When you make me an offer for $200,000, you make me an offer of $200,000, I say, no, I'm not going to accept $200,000, but I would accept $205,000. What do we call that? We call that a counter offer. In this class, you need to be very specific about what a counter offer is. A counter offer was first of all a rejection. Okay? A counter offer was first of all a rejection coupled with a new offer. Who is now the offering party? I am the offering party at this point. Okay? In this case, probably the seller. Buyer made me an offer, I rejected it, and now I become the offeror, making you a new offer at $205. All right? Unconditional acceptance. If I change a term and pitch it back to you, that's not unconditional acceptance. Watch out for your clients on this. I had a client one time that did this. Now keep in mind, this is back in the day of paper and horse and buggy. I mean, we were riding stuff around. We didn't have all this digital communication. So I drop off an offer at my seller's house. Hey, we got a great offer right here. Look it over tonight, sign it. I'll come back by tomorrow morning. I'll pick it up. I'll go make copies, and we'll get everything taken care of. The things we did at that time. Okay? So the next morning I call them up. We did have phones at that time. So I called them up the next morning. And I say, did you sign the contract? Yep, we talked about it last night. We signed it. Did you sign it as written? Yeah, we signed it as written. So I call up the buyers and say, congratulations, we're in the contract. I swing by to pick up the contract, and here's what happened. Apparently, they couldn't make the June 23rd closing date. So what they had said was, oh yeah, we just changed the closing date. And I'm like, crap. Would you say the closing date is an essential term of the contract? So we were not under contract. This was a counter offer. It's what that was. Well, it's not a big deal. It's just the settlement date. It's an essential term of this contract. The minute that you change it, I now have to go back to the buyers and say, buyers, are you willing to accept these new terms? And what if the buyer says no? There is no contract. There is no contract at that point. I can remember having conversations with sellers back in the day and say, before you get too petty and start picking someone apart for $100 or $200, keep in mind the minute that you reject it, that offer is no longer on the table. You go back $200 difference and they say no, you might wish that that one was back on the table, but it is not. Okay? Offer should be clearly defined. Acceptance should be unconditional. Okay? That is a big deal. And then obviously you know the rule about offer acceptance and communication. Okay? All right. Another essential element of a valid contract is contractual capacity. The parties must have the ability to enter into a binding contract, but we spend a lot of time talking about that, so I feel good about it. Contractual capacity, 18 seconds, boom, done. Okay? I want you to put a star beside this next word, consideration. It is an essential element of a valid contract that there be consideration. I'm going to give you the world's worst definition of consideration, and you're going to write it down anyway. Here's my definition of consideration. Something in exchange for something. That was unfulfilling, wasn't it? That was unfulfilling. Something in exchange for something. Now here's the reason that I do that. If there's a buyer and a seller in a real estate transaction, what is the consideration? When a buyer's buying a house from a seller, what's the consideration? You guys didn't do bad on that. I heard someone say the offer, I heard someone say the price. A lot of people think it's the money. A lot of people think it's the money. Now here's what I know. When a buyer buys a house, at the end of the transaction, the buyer's going to bring the money and the seller's going to bring the deed, right? Okay, I know that's going to happen. But it was a contract long before that seller ever had any money, wasn't it? Yeah. And so you say, well, it can't be the money that was binding then. So what was it? Here's what it was. It was the mutual exchange of promises. What did the buyer promise to do? I promised to buy your house for $200,000. And what did the seller promise to do? I promised to sell you this house for $200,000 under these terms. So that's what I mean for something. It's actually the exchange of promises that was the consideration, because there hasn't been any money change hands yet. Okay? Consideration. Something in exchange for something. A promise in exchange for a promise of like value. At the end, it'll be money indeed. Okay?
What about the earnest money?
Aha, great question. Great question. So the question is earnest money consideration? Is earnest money consideration? No. Earnest money is not consideration. Now watch this little test right here. Does consideration have to be present for a contract to be binding? Consideration. Consideration has to be present for a contract to be binding. Does earnest money have to be present for a contract to be binding? No. If earnest money is not required to make a contract binding, why do we typically collect earnest money? You'll probably get the first one right off the top of your head. Why do we collect earnest money?
Show that they have liquidity.
Show that they have the ability to put together some money, right? Show that they have the financial wherewithal. Okay? What's another one? That was the hard one, by the way. What's the easy one? To show good faith. To show good faith, right? That's most people would have said that one to start with, okay? So the three reasons that you collect earnest money are to show good faith, to show that the buyer has the ability to scrape together some funds. Got to be honest with you, before I take my $5